All right, start with Liam Dollard. Yeah, I know you know everyone, but just it's always kind of worth going over the ground as well. So Liam went from being cloakroom attendant to killing it at Sides, and he was their resident. But more importantly, probably than that, was all of the mixtapes that he made. And they went out like a virus through the city and the country. And they just brought rave to the nation. So Liam Dollard, the man with the records that nobody else had. There he is. So next up, we've Francois. And Francois was the guy who used to start his techno sets down at UFO and Alien with a bit of Hawkwind. And, and the mantra was, if you want to get into it, you've got to get out of it. So Francois was ENS officer in UCD, Students' Union, from 1989. And so he was the guy who pretty much injected rave straight into the middle class student population of Ireland. And so we have a lot to thank him for. And he did that while, and I think this is kind of interesting because there's a circularity to this, he did all of that while personally standing in the High Court of Ireland defending an action against the Students' Union by Spook. So, big up Francois. Aoife Ni Canna. Resident now, still resident, still giving it socks at liquor rooms and Yucky-O. Possibly had the longest running residency, 8 years at Reroll. Started out in Limerick, running clubs with another panellist, Kevin Barry, down in Limerick. And then came up here and met Tony Walsh and started the Horny Organ Tribe, which had the most extraordinary nights in the Ormond Mad Out of It Centre, as Noogie called it. So Tony Walsh said that she was the voice of reason during those days, but I reckon, considering who she was hanging out with, that wasn't too difficult. So Kevin Barry had his raving education in Sir Henry's down in Cork in the early 1990s, which is a pretty good place to start, I think. You'll all know him as a novelist, the writer of City of Bohane and Beetlebone. And probably, I think, the most interesting fact that I know about him, just recently read about him, is that he had a landlady in those days in Cork whose name was Helen. It's true. It's true, right?
So good to name it twice,
Yeah. So Sunil Sharpe, also still absolutely killing it. Internationally, thank you very much. Just extraordinary legacy in terms of production, the labels, and then the DJing. And I suppose, really, his gravestone is just going to read, "Fuck you guys, I played a Trezor," right? So I asked everybody, but really at the last minute, I asked everyone to bring an object that that they kept from their early raving days. So I can see Francois has something there, so I'm going to ask him to talk about what he brought in.
We'd just like to involve the people who came to the club. We had membership cards. Sadly, most of them disappeared, I think, probably destroyed by chopping up lines of speed. But we used to bring out stuff like matchboxes, but we also brought out various fanzines and stuff like that, which we like to keep the crowd interested in. Part of the membership scheme was we used to fill out, would you mind giving us your email address? And of course, back then, nobody had email addresses. So the only stuff we actually got into our email address, UFO at Ireland.com or whatever it was stuff from UFO enthusiasts from the States. worrying about the UFO situation in Ireland.
And Kevin, I know you didn't get a chance to bring anything in, but you've talked really about.
I brought my lungs and my heart, which I managed to hang on to, and my liver just about. Actually, I live in Lough Arrow in County Sligo, and it had the highest number of UFO sightings in Europe all through the 1990s. But then she died. It was this one old lady who used to be out all the time, and she had a UFO society in Boyle. And the first week we moved up there, we bought a local paper, and it was like Camogie meeting and the Pittion Putt, and then it was UFO club meets Tuesday night. And don't tell us, fucking hell. But no, I didn't manage to bring any objects. No. I'm sorry.
No, don't worry. But actually, just before we go on, because I know you've written really evocatively about those early days in Cork, and like this whole idea of bringing in objects is really to kind of trigger memories. But what was your memories of kind of like, you know, the smell of Rave and the smell of
the smell of Sir Henry's, Jesus Christ.
Poppers.
Actually, as a writer, what you're often doing as you go around is eavesdropping, you know, and trying to pick up bits of dialogue for your stories. And I want to report the best ever bit of dialogue I heard in Sir Henry's toilets. Yeah, was two lads, two young fellas from the north side, and one said, "How many you want, boy?" To the other, and he said, 6, and I've one at home for coming down. Which was my favourite. But it was, like Henry's was absolutely manky, and there was this weird black kind of tarry paint that used to go onto your white and orange jeans, and you'd come out at the end like, oh jeez, I'm destroyed, but it was great. It smelled of Vicks, yeah, essentially.
Okay. Liam, did you get to bring anything in?
Well, yes, I didn't want to go up to the attic because of the present weather, so I'm still wearing the same belt that I wore back in those early days, so cheeky, you know, that's what I bought.
Okay,
my belt.
That's allowed. But to just go back to what Kevin was talking about, in terms of venues, we're all familiar with the really unadorned, grim, grotty venues that a lot of this activity took place in. And there's some, I don't know, personally, I'm much more comfortable in those places than walking into the Shelburne or something. You know, what is it about those kind of places, those kind of venues that we like being in?
I don't know, I guess it's the smells, all right. Sides was like the first club that I DJ'd in, but it was also the first place I clubbed in, but that popper smell, does anyone smell that popper?
Smelly socks, eh?
That's quite a harsh smell. You probably need to smell it if you haven't, but that's one of the earliest smells I have of sides. But that was 2 years before that, but that's some smell, I'll tell you. Talk about smells, that trumps a lot of smells.
Aoife, did you get to bring anything in?
I would have liked to like Liam, like just going to go flyer digging was quite hard. The first thing that came into my mind obviously was a flyer, and I was thinking of Juicy Fruit, which was like my first proper residency in the Rock Garden on Saturdays. And I had started off on Sundays with the Horny Organ Tribe as flyer girl, warm-up DJ, the door girl. And while I was in there, I got my own Saturday night. So that was kind of why Juicy Fruit came in, because it was like my first residency. And the promoter there from the Rock Garden, Melanie, had her own kind of style and image that she wanted for Juicy Fruit. So she thought I'd be suitable. So I couldn't find, I definitely have the Juicy Fruit flyers. I couldn't find any Horny Organ Tribe ones, so I just brought our most recent Horny Organ Tribe flyer, because I literally just took it off my wall when I was coming in.
That's part of it, yeah.
Yeah. So, but again, like the kind of flyers that myself and Kevin were doing were just so homemade. We used to get our friends to draw stuff and cut them up, spend hours and hours cutting up, and it would even cost us money then to get them printed
We
out. And
we were trying to remember the name of the first club we put on, and it was called YAH, Y-A-H with an exclamation mark.
because we were so high.
I think we just discovered ecstasy or something. Yeah, that's a great name. Yeah, that's what we call it. Then we got cool and we called it Release. Discovered, yeah.
Smooth.
Release the Yeah is a great name. That's a good.
So, Sunil, what are your first memories of Rave?
Probably mixtapes, probably listening to the radio actually. Wasn't going to raves, it was kind of being on the outside a little bit because I guess like a lot of people I would have listened to the radio, and that's where I was coming into contact with it first. So I only read the email again and I missed the thing about bringing an object, but it probably would be mixtapes. Some of my favourite mixtapes I don't own anymore, because when you'd be back at a session or people be around, they'd say, oh, that's a great tape, give us a lend of it. So I tended to probably give away some of my best tapes. But one of the things that really got me into DJing was when I started going to places like Music Power or whatever, and I put on a record and I go, fuck, that's the track DJ Dad played, or that's the tune Billy Nasty played, or whatever it was. So mixtapes were really important for me actually, because I think going to clubs, before I was old enough to go to clubs, that was my only communication or my way of and television as well. Actually, there was a lot of good programs on television as well. So, but it wasn't until I hit 16 that I started going to clubs, and then. But the mixtapes were very important.
And what kind of radio stations were you listening to? Can you remember? Even?
Probably like Sunset, Club FM. What else? Probably other ones I didn't know the name of as well. And then by the end of the 90s, then I probably would have come across things like Power FM. I remember hearing Giles Armstrong play one night, and it was a real crackly signal, and I was getting a little bit, and I was like, shoot, and I finally got a number, and then I rang him and just started burning the ear off him. Managed to get his address and send him a mixtape. And back then it was very hard to actually meet people in the scene, so I very much felt like an outsider then. So any little bit of contact that I could make with people was very, very important. But once you started and once you kind of step into it, then it kind of opens up. So yeah.
We'll come back to that, because I want to talk a little bit more about how you connect with people and also how you pass on the connections and the information. But just to get just a tiny little bit political, I suppose one of the things that's always talked about rave culture is that it was this big cultural phenomenon, but that it changed things. And like we've all been around on the scene for 20 or 30 years, and we have seen things change. But can any of you attribute any particular changes to rave culture? In terms of our culture and where things are now. What about you, Francois?
I think it made people less insular. I mean, when the rave thing kicked off, nobody really gave a fuck who you were fucking, what colour you were, what class, background and all that sort of stuff. It was kind of, I know it's a bit kind of cliche talking about the inclusivity of the rave scene, but it actually did change people's attitudes towards that. I mean, for example, the gay club culture and the straight club culture would never have mixed if it hadn't been for the rave scene. And also, I mean, people kind of tend to forget how strong an influence the gay club scene actually had on the rave scene. You had lots of clubs that were going before rave really kind of bubbled up underground. From the underground, there was a lot of gay clubs that were actually doing really important stuff. Not straight start going to them and go, geez, man, this is a fucking great night. Like, what's going on here? It's like, oh my God, these gay people, they aren't strange after all. Like, they aren't told like what the priests are saying to us. But it was interesting. I mean, did that kind of continue on? I think it did certainly make people a lot more liberal. You had like the change with the divorce referendum and stuff that came up with that. I mean, did that help in it? I think it certainly did. People were going, well, look, there's a bigger world out there to what we've been told and what we've been brought up to. We've been lied to for years about, well, this is the Catholic thing and this is what we have to do and this is your role in life. You're going to have to get a job, whether it's in the bank or the older son becomes a priest or a doctor or something like that. But you're going, well, I don't want that fucking life anymore. I want a bit of something change. You have to remember that this was in course. I mean, the rave thing kicked off. It was in the midst of possibly the worst recession that this country had seen. Thousands and thousands of people were literally emigrating every year, just leaving. There was nothing to do. I mean, what you could do, you could either just stay, party, have a bit of fun, or just go and emigrate, because there was absolutely no choice in this country. It was 80s and early 90s Dublin was a dour, grey, horrible place, and rave really brought a bit of colour and excitement and fun into it.
Kevin, I'd ask you about the same thing.
Yeah.
You've talked about that a bit in your essays.
I think one of the things that it really opened up was a kind of a DIY ethos. You know, what an older generation would have called a kind of a punk ethic. Whereas the sense was that if something was, if the town was shit and if there was nothing on, you could put on your own thing and have a good time with it. And you could see that moving from certainly in Cork in the 90s, you could see that attitude moving out of club culture and into other things. So someone like Cork Adorka would start doing plays outside of traditional theatres and putting on in the Walsh plays like Disco Pigs, and then literary stuff, you know, little magazines starting off. People realising, okay, if it doesn't exist, you can actually make it, and you can actually make it really cheap. And it doesn't matter if the production value isn't amazing. It's just that you can do it yourself and not have to wait around for some sort of entertainment sector or some sort of artistic sector provide you with something. You can just go and do it and put stuff on and make the flyers and make it how you want it yourself. And I think that was really, really important. And so many kind of interest in kind of theatre companies and writers, and also kind of food stuff. You know, people, independent food producers and stuff, they all started with that kind of club scene and printing their flyers and putting stuff around the place, realising, you know, it doesn't have to be like Man Daz world where you sit around and wait for what you're offered. You can kind of make it yourself.
Yeah. I think the one big thing about Rave was just the sheer numbers, just the amount of people that it affected. I think that's probably the most important aspect of it.
It was very visible, the kind of demographic mix in a place like Cork, which is a much smaller city, and you still have, you know, 800 plus people in Henry's for Sweat on a Saturday night, and when the lights went on at 2:20 and you realise who you'd been hugging for the last 3, and it was like. And it was such certainly up to about 1993 or 94. It was such a mad mix because it was all the working class kids from the north side of the States. There was students. There were the gays. There were the hairdressers, and it really didn't matter at all. And must have been the first time in the history of the country's second city where all these groups had gone out for the same night. You know, and it never happened before in all our towns and cities. So it was natural to feel like this is going to have an amazing, wonderful, huge social effect. And of course it doesn't really. But at the same time, it did sort of open up the sense of a possibility of something being really good. It got kind of messier as the decade progressed, you know, and as more drugs came in and more kind of money around the side. Money always corrupts things. I mean, I remember even after Aoife had gone to Dublin and I was still doing clubs in Limerick. I remember Rob, do you remember Rob, who used to put on club nights with? And we were doing one-offs, and I remember the dangerous thing happened. We put one on, and it made a few quid, you know? We put about 300 people in at a tenner a head, and suddenly realised, you can make a few pounds out of this, you know? And suddenly the purity kind of goes out of it from the music point of view. You realise, Jesus, I can make money out of it, and rows start happening, and things get kind of a bit poisoned in that way. And that largely happened, I think, in the country to an extent over the 90s as that went on. It became more kind of commercialised, really.
Yeah. Would you be nostalgic, Liam, or I don't know, jaundiced?
It's funny when you talk about when it started. Obviously, it was quite small, the whole scene. But one thing you'd notice, I had been part of the whole thing in London, the 88, 89 thing. Well, more 89. But the one thing, the difference was over there, everybody was into it. Like from all ages, people from all different types of background. But when we came over here and we started it, and it was quite fresh, it was basically a working class thing. So Dublin was still a rock city in 1989, 90. And they just didn't get it. They didn't like it. They said, that'll be over in 6 months. Just do your thing. We'll just keep doing the chords. And it wasn't for a few years. It took quite a long time for a start, right? The age group was under 20. And I had come from London where we'd be out dancing all night till at sunrise, and the average age would be 29, 30. I was under 20, I was 25. So there was two things, the age group and where people were from in Dublin. It was basically Sheriff Street and Coolock, Ballyfermot. Ballybrack had a big say in it for some reason, but it gathered a little, small group from everywhere else in Dublin. But it was basically yeah, it was weird. I was surprised by it, and it was also very raw, you know, with that whole working class thing.
Why do you think that was, that music appealed to that cohort or that group of people so quickly, like that they got it so quickly?
Well, I think they're always ahead of the game when it comes to trends. I think that's what I thought, and I still think that. They just get trends a little bit quicker. That's just an opinion, it's not a fact. But also, house music was just shunned by the general 24-year-old. They still wanted to be U2. They still wanted to be in a band, and that took a long time to break, you know. And you know, I had mates in bands, and they'd say, "Go off and do your DJing and whatever," you know. And funny enough, 4 or 5 years later, they're all kind of in Switch, you know. but the initial 5 years, it was, you know, what's going on here? Like, why is everyone so young? Like, I was like, I know I'm one of the older guys, but I was 24, 25 at the time, and like, as I said, like, it did change, as you know, as you're talking about, but it took 2 or 3 years for anyone of my age to get into it and sort of like put the guitars down.
Yeah, well, I mean, Dublin is a conservative town, and it's...
Yeah, it was also a pretty rock town.
Like that's what, like musically.
And that's why, we'll probably talk about it later, but that's why when it comes to the production of house music, you know, that took a long time to figure out the computers, the software, and everything that goes with it, you know.
Well, that's something I'd like to ask Sunil and Aoife about, because they're still very much DJing and still very much on the scene. And do you think a Dublin sound has developed at all?
Not exactly, no, not really. But it's no bad thing. Oh, sorry, that's what I think. I don't really think. I think for a little while with D1 and the techno side of things, there was. Obviously, they had their influences too, but no, I don't think so. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing either. You know, I think there's lots of little pockets, lots of little groups of people doing their own thing. I don't know. We haven't really had a breakout producer that I can really think of. And in fact, there's not that many breakout producer stars in the whole scene. Full stop. So if we did have somebody, it would have been maybe back in the day. I think Anodyne did some very, very individual stuff. I think some of the stuff that came out through Front End Synthetics, I think if there was a label I'd go back to and really appreciate more than any label, that would probably be it. But the same with D1 as well. But I think there's a lot of ambitious people of many different ages, lots of upcoming people, lots of established people, and lots. You know, I think on one hand we can kind of fall into a little bit of a cocoon, because like lots of times we don't want to come into town. Do you know what I mean? That community spirit that used to exist in record shops is there. Olin single-handedly is keeping that alive, and is actually helping lots of people get their music out and set up labels, and that's really important. But I think the other common denominator for this community thing is radio as well. And I think a lot of the people that stay in the game are people that have links with record shops and with radio stations, which I think is really important. But in terms of a sound, and sorry, I'm probably going off on a tangent, but in terms of a sound, it's nothing against Dublin for not having its own sounds. There could have been certain records that would remind people of Dublin, but I don't think there's been anyone who has kind of pioneered the sounds that lots of other people follow. So.
Aoife, what do you think about that idea, though, that Dublin is quite conservative, and just in terms of what you've seen I mean, you've been DJing in the city for so long, but also DJing outside of the city in, you know, Cork and Limerick and Galway. How does it compare, you know?
I wouldn't have thought that Dublin was conservative. Maybe it is, but I find that there's like loads of different areas, you know, whereas in maybe Limerick and Cork and Galway, there'd be only one, whereas in Dublin you can explore techno, or you can explore house, or commercial, or live music, more of that, you know, you've more choice, I suppose. But I would agree with, or when you asked that question there about Dublin having a sound, for a long time I would have said that Dublin had a techno sound until, I suppose, in the last 10 years, and I think, that people like Sunil and Francois and D1 had a lot to do with that, but it's expanded so much. But another thing, I think we were always like running clubs or DJing and that, but we were very slow to start making music in comparison to our peers in England. And as well as that we were very influenced by the UK then, even before dance music, because we were so close to the UK. I think we're more influenced by other things now with internet and stuff like that. But to begin with, anyway, I think we did have, like, comparison to Cork, for instance, we did have a harder, darker sound, even with house music and stuff like that, even with the sides. And
I always thought actually that the further north you got in Ireland, the harder the beats got. The further south, the better the beats were.
It's still the same, actually. It's still
never in
quite
Wexford then.
One time I had to walk into a venue, the guys, who am I DJing with? AK-47. Okay.
Was that Club 303, was it?
Yeah, that's different.
That was another one.
And Francois, what about your experience of, like, you stopped DJing around 2002, and I think that's something that's happened to a huge amount of us who are involved in the scene, is that you reach a point of burnout, you know, and...
I wouldn't call it burnout, but I mean, as the millennium approached, the kind of whole scene changed. I mean, I was always into the whole faceless techno bollocks type of thing anyway. I mean, at the end of the day, it's better to have an unknown DJ playing really good tunes to a bunch of people who are really having a good time. But then you start people that, like, the kind of the super clubs started coming in, like Pod and stuff like that. And you're getting DJs who are being paid, whatever, a few grand for doing a couple of hours. And then all the local DJs were kind of being pushed out of the scene. And come the millennium then, it was just going, this is ridiculous. The whole thing is just really just went up his ass. Plus, I'll add on top of that, I think, a lot more people are doing coke rather than these, which kind of really killed the buzz on the dance floor around that time. And I was just going, fuck this shit, like, I'm out of here. So.
Yeah, always a yoke party over a coke party, right? But Sunil, you kept going through it, and Aoife did as well. And that period is really interesting to me. Anyway, that kind of lull period,
Mid-2000s kind of.
In the mid-2000s, where you have a lot of the labels that did have a burst of energy around the millennium fade out, and clubs, particular clubs fade out. But you guys kept going. What motivated you to keep going, and what have you got out of that?
Just regarding the film, you're going to see that in the film, and in the radio doc I did, it's the part where I got stuck, and I was I didn't have anything. There was nobody talking about this time, and what I noticed was that through listening back to interviews with younger people, they were talking about people like Sunil and the creation gigs, which is also covered on this film as well. So as much as, let's say, you were saying that G1 was finishing up and Bass Bin and things like that, kind of very strong labels, prominent labels in the city, you also had the underground was coming back. Again, it was the end of the Celtic Tiger and the start of a recession. I had to remember myself as well what I was doing, and I know exactly when I was living in the suburbs. I was doing a lot of not commercial gigs, but like DJing in shops and working for PR companies and things like that. And I was obsessed with buying a house. And that was it had to do with what was around us as well at the time, But then anything like that kind of, if there's a lull or if things go really overground, then something underground happens as well. So as much as it was, reflecting on it now, I can safely say it was a bad time. It was probably the worst time that the whole club generations had. And I'm glad as well with the film that it's kind of a similar story as well. So that, we collected, myself and James collected different stories for different documentaries for it too. But anything like that, will go back underground, you know, so it kind of did. And when a lot of the recordings in both the film and my documentary, they were recorded maybe 2010, 2011. I think mine came out in 2013. It was still a really uncertain time. It was still a really, so my doc kind of ends with this uncertainty and where is it going now? Whereas if it ended now, it would be a lot more
optimistic.
Yeah, exactly. Similar to when we were coming out of the late 80s, but the recession too, and everything was really grim. Even the music we were listening to, as amazing as it was, the lyrics were really kind of depressed. The music was really dark, and then all of a sudden it was hands in the air and big black women singing, and do you know, that kind of way, that it was just this really new, uplifting music. So in the same way, what I remember about that was I'd started doing my radio show and I was interviewing people that were making music, so there wasn't much going on in the clubs, but there was people that could afford to buy Ableton for the first time, and they were at home making music, and some successfully were experimenting in that. You also had Body Tonic as well had started, you know, who were young, enthusiastic, underground guys that worked very hard. They were really passionate about it, that, you know, a lot of us might have got a bit tired.
You need new, fresh people to plug the gap.
Yeah.
But Sunil, what is your experience of that period?
Yeah, it's interesting that Aoife mentions Body Tonic, because I started out pretty much at the same time as playing out and whatnot. But I don't know. I think for me, why I stayed in it is just a very simple thing. I love it. You know, I just love it, and it's again, it sounds like a cliche, but it's what I do. You know, it feels like something I'm very connected to. That, you know, I don't see myself ever quitting. And I've actually been thinking about it recently in terms of DJing. I think we're kind of getting into uncharted territory now, and that there's a lot of DJs who are getting into their 60s now. You know, there's people that are, and we didn't expect this. You know, it's at one point. You know, people would tell you, well, how long are you going to be doing that for? Or, you know, when will the end point be, or whatever. But I think now we're seeing a very interesting. We're at a very interesting stage, actually. I really noticed this, and it's not just in terms of DJing, but I've really noticed it at some recent gigs. One actually, not here, but it was at a club in Birmingham called House of God, and the age group actually ranges from 18 to people that are in their 60s. You know, you don't maybe notice it on the dance floor, but when the lights come on, you do kind of notice it. You know? And that's something you're seeing a lot. You're seeing people turn up to gigs with their sons or daughters or whatever it might be. And, you know, there's so much with this music that just lets us let ourselves go. You know, it's pure primal music, if you want it to be. And I don't know, for me, I've just always felt a huge connection to it. It's what keeps me going, you know, to be honest. So I don't know. I could go through loads of different things, but I've thought about it, and I've thought I probably will DJ well into my 60s until I can't anymore, you know, unless I have a really big reason to change. Right now, the scene is healthy, but it's also been infected by lots of other shit things and shit people as well, and we have to look after the scene, you know, we really do, and we have to remember the stuff from back in the day, and the people who inspired us, like Francois, like all the old DJs who actually opened up a path for people like me. I've said it in a couple of interviews before, but like Francois welcomed me in. I was actually getting gigs on the back of Francois' recommendations, and he never said it to me. I didn't hear that. I heard it through Louise. But, you know, that's the kind of example people can set, you know, and it's about thinking of other people and not just yourself. And I think it's kind of something that's been lost a little bit, you know, in 2017. But people need to remember that if we want to keep it going.
So yeah, good follow. Just finish up by asking everybody to maybe, and it flows really from what Sunil was talking about, if each person could talk about perhaps a lesson that they've taken from their experience that, you know, that they would like to tell people who are DJing or producing now. Do you want to start, Francois?
Play what you like, not what you think people like, and don't double drop before you go on DJing.
I think actually if I could tell myself something in my early 20s now would be to be a bit more open about music, because I was mostly in Cork at that time. And Cork was really a one-club town. It was Sir Henry's. And the rule was once you got inside the environs of Cork City, everything had to be less than 110 beats per minute. And beyond that was nosebleed stuff that they listened to in Dublin, you know. And actually, you realise that you heard amazing deep house music, and years with it was amazing, but you probably missed out on lots of stuff as well. So to be more open and to be more kind of broad in your taste maybe would be a lesson.
Nice. Liam?
Yeah, I guess, unfortunately, because I was doing it from the start, I've always been labelled an old school DJ, which is fine, but if I go and play out now, unfortunately, I have to play those, and I won't, so I've stopped doing them. So I think the best thing is fairly similar to what Kevin is saying. Like, just open your mind and listen. For the older people, listen to some of the newer stuff that's coming out, whether it's deep house or techno or whatever, instead of harping back to some of the stuff they were, dancing to on the dance floors, whatever. Just to listen to some new music and listen to newer DJs, it'd be a good thing to do,
Similar again. It's the consistency, I suppose, your style of playing. It's not always going to be in fashion, I suppose. I definitely think that my residency in Rera had a huge influence on me, because there was a lot of Latin and funk and Afrobeat DJs. I also had Future Groove records too, so that was it was a really good time for me to develop. But yeah, just to stick to your guns, and you're not always going to be in fashion. But that consistency, I think, will stand, so, yeah.
Yeah, I think to have patience, actually. Sometimes it's a lot of people expect for everything to happen overnight. There's also a lot of producers who have a record or two out and they think it's all going to happen straight away. And I think now, there are a lot of producers turned DJs, so there's a lot of people getting in, they're making their track or two, or they're getting their records out, and they think it'll all happen for them straight away. They have a marketing plan, a PR plan. That's the way it's kind of going now, and the way it has gone. So I don't know, I think a lot of people want something straight away. They want it overnight. They want overnight success, and they don't realise, especially people who haven't come through the record shop culture and the whole thing of collecting physical music for many years. And actually, I don't know, I could go off on one about that, but in general, I think you just have to be patient. Sometimes there are times you feel like giving up, where the music you love, you and I've said before, you hate it. You actually hate it with a passion, and it's a really good feeling, actually, to feel really angry at the scene, to feel really angry at the music, all of those things. It's the best thing that can happen to you, actually. So if that happens to you and you feel that way, see it as a good thing. It means you're passionate, and it means you're going to probably stay in the game, which is a very important motto. Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's it from the panel, and thank you all so much for listening and for being here.